The silence in the mansion was heavy, almost suffocating. Every hallway seemed to echo the absence of something essential, something no luxury or silence could fill. Little Henry's cries pierced the air like an invisible blade, sharp and insistent. For hours the baby had been crying, and no one seemed capable of calming him. Gabriel Montero, a 38-year-old millionaire businessman, sat in his dark leather armchair in his office, staring at the computer screen, but not really seeing anything. His eyes were hollow, as if a part of him had been lost along with Helena, his wife, who had passed away only a few months ago. The baby wailed upstairs, each sound striking through the marble and crystal walls of the mansion, hitting Gabriel with almost cruel intensity. He knew he needed to act, but the weight of grief and guilt paralyzed him. He remembered Helena, how she held Henry, as if every touch could protect him from any harm. And now, alone, he felt incapable of being what his son needed most. Downstairs, Clarice, the housekeeper, moved slowly across the polished floor, trying to ignore the echoing cries that filled the mansion. She was 26, with calloused hands and eyes that carried stories of suffering and resilience. Clarice understood Henry's cries in a way no one else in the mansion could. She remembered her own child, lost under circumstances life cruelly forced upon her, and she felt a deep empathy that couldn't be ignored. Each sob of the baby seemed to pierce something deep inside her, a pain that still burned, but also a spark of hope and faith. The hired nanny, Mariana, had left early that morning, claiming she needed to go to the pharmacy. Everyone knew, however, that her true destination was the shopping mall, escaping the exhausting routine of caring for a baby who cried non-stop. Gabriel, absorbed in his work, pretended not to hear, though each tear from Henry penetrated his conscience. The businessman's heart was torn between the pain of loss and the silent guilt for not being able to replace Helena's presence. Clarice took a deep breath and began to climb the stairs. With each step, her chest tightened further. She knew she had to act before it was too late. When she entered the nursery, she found Henry nearly exhausted, his skin burning, eyes half closed. The bottle left beside the crib contained spoiled milk, soured from the afternoon heat. The baby writhed, seeking something Clarice knew she could give. Without hesitation, she sat in the chair by the window and offered her breast, swollen with milk, a silent blessing life had left her, even after losing her own child weeks earlier. Henry stopped crying immediately. Each suck seemed to draw the nourishment he so desperately needed, and the tension in the mansion eased almost instantly. Gabriel, drawn by an unexpected silence, ascended the stairs and stood at the doorway, eyes wide. There before him was a quiet miracle. Clarice, the housekeeper, providing his son with the life he required. It was subtle yet profound, an act of love beyond explanation. Guilt and grief began to melt away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Clarice, tears in her eyes, whispered soothing words that transcended logic. "It's okay, little one. Auntie's here. God hasn't abandoned us." Henry, finally calm, slept in Clarice's arms, radiating peace as the soft afternoon light filtered through the curtains, as if heaven itself blessed the moment. The external tension, however, remained. Mariana returned later that afternoon, carrying shopping bags, completely oblivious to the gravity of the situation. Gabriel noticed the immediate difference in Henry's behavior. The baby smiled, kicked his legs, and made joyful sounds whenever Clarice walked by. The nanny tried to intervene, but it was clear her presence was irrelevant compared to the sacred bond forming between the housekeeper and the infant. The phone rang incessantly. Neighbors, relatives, and friends pressured Gabriel with advice and opinions, unable to grasp the miracle that had just occurred. Each call intensified the urgency, creating an atmosphere thick with expectation and suspense. Gabriel felt torn. On one hand, he knew Clarice had saved Henry's life. On the other, he faced social pressure and skepticism, a test of faith amid chaos. As night fell, the mansion seemed to exhale, the weight of the day giving way to a heavy, almost sacred quiet. Clarice remained by Henry's side, rocking him gently in her arms, her soft humming filling the nursery like a fragile, delicate thread of warmth and comfort. Each note she sang seemed to suspend time itself, weaving a cocoon around the child that no grandeur, no wealth, no opulence of the Montero estate could ever replicate. The shadows in the room danced lightly against the walls, and the golden lamplight reflected in the baby's eyes, making them shimmer with a serenity that had been absent all day. Gabriel stood at the doorway, motionless, caught between awe and disbelief, his hands clenched loosely at his sides as if he feared disturbing the miraculous peace that had settled over the room. Relief washed over him in waves, yet it was laced with a complicated tangle of gratitude, humility, and a gnawing doubt he could not quite name. He realized with an almost painful clarity that nothing he had acquired in life, no skyscraper, no bank account, no title, could ever have brought Henry this sense of security, this quiet joy. Money could buy comfort, convenience, and even obedience, but it could never buy the intangible, delicate threads of love, sacrifice, and devotion that Clarice had woven with her own hands that night. And yet, there it was, tangible in the warmth of the baby's skin, audible in the peaceful rhythm of his breathing, visible in the trust and vulnerability shining from his tiny, angelic face. Gabriel's mind raced, a whirlwind of questions and uncertainties. How had he been so blind, so preoccupied with his work and grief, that he had overlooked this simple, profound truth? How had he assumed that every solution required money, influence, or strategy, when the purest miracles were unfolding silently, quietly, in the dim glow of a nursery lamp? He knew, deep in his soul, that something extraordinary had happened that day, something that would mark the trajectory of his life forever, altering the very essence of who he was and what he valued. A miracle had occurred, raw and unassuming, and he was standing there, a silent witness to it, unable to look away. But alongside the wonder, there lingered an unspoken tension, a fear that gnawed at the edges of his heart. The path ahead was uncertain, strewn with invisible obstacles. How could he ensure Henry's safety, nurture his innocence, and yet honor the bond that had formed between his son and Clarice without misunderstanding or interference? The world outside these walls was ruthless and judgmental. It measured people by status, wealth, and appearances. No one would understand the depth of Clarice's sacrifice, her silent heroism, the sacred intimacy of what had just occurred. Could he protect this truth, protect this miracle, without it being twisted, exploited, or diminished? The mansion itself seemed to hold its breath as the night deepened, the silence almost reverent, amplifying every thought, every emotion, every heartbeat. Gabriel's reflection turned inward, peeling back layers of pride, grief, and arrogance he had carried unknowingly for years. He realized with growing humility that true strength had nothing to do with power or dominance. It was found in faith, in empathy, in courage, the courage to act selflessly, to give without expecting, to love without reservation, to protect without seeking recognition. Clarice had demonstrated all of this, not through words, not through grand gestures, but through simple, unwavering devotion. Her presence, her touch, the gentle, unwavering way she had soothed Henry, revealed a truth Gabriel had never fully comprehended, not even in his most reflective moments, that love is not transactional, that it does not bow to the rules of commerce, ambition, or expectation. It cannot be bought with wealth, coerced through fear, or manipulated with power. Love, the kind that transforms, that endures, that leaves an indelible mark on the soul, emerges in the quietest, most fragile moments. When the world is asleep, when no one is watching, when the ordinary becomes extraordinary through the sheer force of care and devotion. It is forged in vulnerability, in the courage to give oneself fully without seeking acknowledgement, in the patient, tireless acts of nurturing another's heart, body, and spirit. It thrives in shadows, in whispered lullabies, in hands that tremble yet persist in offering comfort. True love, he realized, is invisible in its making, but monumental in its consequences, reshaping hearts, repairing hidden wounds, illuminating dark corners of existence, and transforming lives in ways words can scarcely capture or logic can explain. Gabriel's chest tightened as the enormity of this truth settled within him, a slow, overwhelming pressure that seemed to compress his very soul. A lump rose in his throat, making his breaths shallow and urgent, a silent storm of emotion he could not, would not, resist. His eyes were glued to Clarice as she cradled Henry in her arms, her body curved protectively around him, her every movement infused with tenderness and reverence, her soft whisper of a voice threading the nursery with warmth, hope, and a kind of sacred calm that seemed to transcend the physical boundaries of the room. Each note, each touch, each gentle sway was a silent testament to the depth of her love, a love that required no repayment, no recognition, no audience. And as he watched, Gabriel understood with startling clarity that this was a gift the universe had handed him in a form he had never anticipated, a miracle not of gold or grandeur, but of spirit, heart, and soul. He realized painfully and beautifully that all the riches he had amassed, the empire he had built, the accolades he had received, they were pale shadows in comparison to the gift of witnessing love in its purest form. Life had given him something far more precious than any inheritance or investment, the realization that the most profound miracles are born in quiet, unassuming acts of devotion, in moments where hearts meet silently and the world fades away, leaving only the fragile, luminous connection between human beings. And it was in this recognition, this swelling of awe and gratitude, that Gabriel knew, deep within the marrow of his bones, that he could never, under any circumstances, allow this treasure to slip through his fingers, not from his son, whose life had been touched and reshaped by Clarice's care, not from Clarice herself, whose spirit had revealed the boundless potential of selfless love, not from the fragile, miraculous world that had been created in that dimly lit nursery, in that sacred night when ordinary gestures became extraordinary miracles. Every heartbeat echoed with this profound truth, each pulse reverberating through him as though the very rhythm of life had aligned to speak a singular message, that the forces which truly shape destinies are invisible, unquantifiable, yet more powerful than any empire, any fortune, any crown. Every breath he drew was heavy with the weight of silent promises, a vow forged in the quiet crucible of his soul, binding him irrevocably to a commitment far greater than ambition or wealth could ever demand. He vowed, with every ounce of his being, to protect this delicate, irreplaceable connection, to nurture it as though it were the rarest, most precious artifact in existence, to shield it with vigilance born not from fear, but from reverence. Every glance at Clarice and Henry reminded him that the truest forces in life, the ones that carve meaning into the void, are not measured in numbers, nor titles, nor possessions, but in the courage to give without expectation, the patience to tend tirelessly, the humility to witness beauty in its purest, most unadorned form, and the quiet audacity to allow love to flourish freely, without manipulation or constraint. Gabriel felt a surge of resolve coursing through him, a physical sensation that tightened his chest and set his mind ablaze, as if the marrow of his bones had suddenly been infused with clarity and purpose. He understood, with a depth that shook him to his core, that his life had shifted irrevocably, that a chapter had ended and a new one, unfathomably profound and terrifyingly beautiful, had begun. From that moment onward, every choice he would make, every path he would follow, every decision that weighed upon him would be defined not by the hollow triumphs of acquisition, the fleeting satisfaction of status, or the brittle illusions of power, but by The quiet, enduring miracles that unfolded in acts of compassion, in gestures of tenderness, in the unwavering devotion to another's fragile heart. These were the moments that shaped eternity, invisible yet indelible, ordinary yet miraculous. As he continued to watch Clarice, the gentle guardian of Henry's fragile soul, the quiet, selfless protector who had dared to pour love into the world without a single demand or expectation, Gabriel felt a reverent awe settle over him like a mantle. The room, dimly lit and suffused with a tender glow from the lamp by the crib, became a sanctuary where time itself seemed to pause, honoring the sacredness of the bond unfolding before him. Outside, the world might churn with noise, ambition, and distraction, blind to the magnitude of what had taken place within these walls. Yet none of that mattered. None of it could touch the sacred truth that had rooted itself in Gabriel's heart. This love, this fragile yet indomitable miracle, was theirs, alone, untouchable, untarnished, eternal, a force that would withstand storms, challenge, and the relentless march of time. In that instant, Gabriel realized that the very essence of life was condensed into such moments, small, unassuming acts that ripple outward with the potency of a tidal wave, invisible to most, yet capable of altering the course of hearts and souls. Every shiver of Henry's response to Clarice's touch, every soft murmur of comfort, every blink of understanding exchanged between mother and child was a universe in itself, a testament to the quiet, unstoppable power of love. And within him, a transformation took root, a profound, irrevocable shift that rendered trivial the pursuits he had once believed paramount. He felt an unshakable obligation, not just to witness this miracle, but to nurture, protect, and defend it, recognizing that in doing so, he was aligning with a truth that transcended wealth, influence, and even life itself. Gabriel's mind spun with possibilities and fears alike, yet beneath the tremor of uncertainty, a steady, undeniable certainty emerged, that the world outside might never understand, might never recognize the sacredness of what had occurred here, but that did not diminish it. The miracle was no less miraculous for being unseen, the love no less profound for being uncelebrated. It existed in its own right, immutable and eternal, a force as vast as the heavens and as intimate as the smallest heartbeat echoing in a quiet nursery. And in that realization, Gabriel's chest swelled with gratitude, hope, and an almost unbearable joy. The path ahead might be uncertain, fraught with challenges and shadows, yet he felt ready, anchored by the unshakable truth that he had witnessed something beyond explanation, something beyond wealth or power. He had seen love in its purest form, and in seeing it, he was changed forever. The morning arrived with a hesitant light, pale and trembling, filtering through the tall windows of Gabriel's mansion. The world outside moved with its usual arrogance, oblivious to the quiet revolution unfolding within these walls. Yet, for Gabriel, each sunrise now carried weight, a reminder that the days ahead would demand vigilance, courage, and unwavering commitment. He lingered outside the nursery door, listening to the soft murmurs of Henry's breathing, the tender rhythm of Clarice, humming a song whose words he could not understand, but whose essence he felt in his chest. There was a delicate magic in that sound, a reassurance that despite the cold, unfeeling nature of the outside world, warmth and love could still flourish here. But Gabriel knew the danger was real. The pressures of his world, investments, board meetings, public scrutiny, and the subtle, relentless curiosity of those who would exploit any vulnerability, threatened to intrude. Money could build walls, hire security, and command respect, but it could not shield the heart from harm. Gabriel's mind raced, considering every possibility, every risk that could touch Clarice or his son. He thought of the whispered rumors in society, the envious glances of colleagues, the subtle but persistent assumption that someone like Clarice, humble, hard-working, unassuming, was out of place in his meticulously curated world. Could he truly protect her from the cynical eyes of those who would misunderstand her, who might judge her intentions and distort the truth? Clarice emerged from the nursery with Henry in her arms, his small face relaxed in peaceful sleep. Gabriel felt his chest tighten at the sight. There was no elegance, no grandeur in this moment, only the raw, undeniable purity of care. Clarice's movements were slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic, and Gabriel understood that in every gesture she offered Henry something priceless, a sanctuary from fear, a cocoon of unconditional love. He wanted to say something, to voice the gratitude and awe that swelled inside him, but words failed him. Instead, he simply watched, each heartbeat a drum of silent affirmation, promising that he would stand between this miracle and the harshness of the world beyond these walls. Yet even as he contemplated this sacred responsibility, uncertainty gnawed at him. How could he balance the demands of a life built on power and influence with the tenderness and patience required to sustain this new, fragile reality? He had never known a love so consuming, so pure, so utterly untethered from expectation. It was a revelation that thrilled and terrified him in equal measure. Every instinct honed by decades of business dealings, the ruthlessness, the calculation, the unyielding drive to control, felt irrelevant here, almost crude, in the face of the subtle, transformative power of Clarice's care. He realized with a shiver that ran down his spine that he was unprepared for this kind of love, yet wholly committed to learning, to understanding, to becoming the protector and ally that both Clarice and Henry deserved. The days that followed were a careful choreography of observation and intervention. Gabriel watched as Clarice's patience never wavered, as her quiet humor lit up the nursery even on the most difficult mornings, and as her gentle discipline guided Henry without ever dampening his spirit. There was an artistry to her care, an intuitive understanding of a child's needs that no amount of wealth or tutoring could replicate. Gabriel felt both awe and inadequacy, knowing that he had accumulated power and knowledge in realms that now seemed trivial, while Clarice possessed a wisdom that transcended titles and riches. Yet the world outside began to stir in subtle, insidious ways. Colleagues and acquaintances, unaware of the tender miracle blossoming within Gabriel's home, began to whisper about the arrangement, about the young woman entrusted with the child of a millionaire. They speculated, judged, and misinterpreted every action, every look, every small kindness. Gabriel felt a tightening in his chest, a deep, visceral anger mixed with helplessness. He had protected entire businesses from collapse, navigated hostile takeovers, and silenced scandals before they began. Yet this delicate human connection, this miracle of love and trust, required vigilance of a different sort, a vigilance that pierced the heart and tested the soul. One evening, as shadows lengthened and the mansion fell into silence, Gabriel approached Clarice in the nursery. Henry was asleep, nestled in her arms, and the room was suffused with the soft glow of the lamp. Gabriel knelt beside them, his hands trembling slightly, unsure whether to disturb the sacred scene. Clarice looked up, sensing his presence, and offered a small, tired smile. "He's settled," she whispered. Gabriel nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat, feeling a surge of gratitude that almost overcame him. You have no idea what this means," he murmured. "What you do, what you are. It's beyond anything I could have imagined." Clarice shook her head gently, a quiet humility in her gaze. "I do it because he needs it, that's all," she said softly. "Not for thanks, not for praise, just because it matters." Her words, simple yet profound, struck Gabriel like a bolt of lightning. He realized that the greatest power in the world was not to command, to possess, or to dominate, but to serve, to care, to love without expectation of reward. It was a truth that changed everything he thought he knew about strength, about success, about life itself. From that night onward, Gabriel's vigilance became far more than a mere sense of duty. It evolved into a sacred, unbreakable covenant, a silent, sacred oath that existed beyond words and beyond time itself. It was an unspoken promise to himself, to Clarice, and to Henry, a commitment that no force, whether human or circumstantial, whether born of malice or ignorance, would ever disturb the fragile, luminous world he had come to hold in his heart with trembling reverence. Every shadow in the corridors of his mansion, every whisper carried by the wind outside, became a potential threat in his mind, prompting him to anticipate dangers that might never materialize, to consider every possible angle of intrusion, to calculate ways to shield the innocence, the purity, and the tender vulnerability of the child and the woman who had so completely and quietly captured his soul. Yet even as he meticulously strategized, as he wove protective layers around their lives like an invisible fortress, he was painfully aware that overprotection could suffocate the very essence of what he sought to preserve. He had to learn the delicate art of balance, how to guide without commanding, how to intervene without disrupting, how to watch without imposing, how to safeguard without casting shadows over the light that Clarice had nurtured in his son's heart. Each day became a complex choreography of presence and restraint, vigilance and patience, guardianship and quiet surrender, as Gabriel navigated the intricate terrain of love, responsibility, and devotion, discovering with each passing moment that the act of protection was itself a profound form of reverence, an acknowledgement of the sacredness of the bond he now cherished above all else. And yet, amidst this ever-present tension, an extraordinary joy began to take root in his chest, subtle at first, like the faintest glow of dawn seeping into the horizon, but steadily growing in strength, radiance, and depth. It was a joy unlike any he had known in his life of wealth, influence, and power. A joy that had nothing to do with accolades, nothing to do with money, nothing to do with conquest or success. It was a joy born of witnessing miracles in their purest form, a child's quiet laughter, a motherly whisper carried across the nursery in the middle of the night, the gentle brush of a hand that said without words, "You are safe, you are loved, you are seen." Each smile from Henry, each soft nod from Clarice, each fleeting moment of unguarded, unpretentious connection became a sacred jewel in the treasury of Gabriel's heart, a collection of treasures no fortune could rival. He understood, in ways that pierced him to his very core, that this love that had grown quietly, persistently, unstoppable in its simplicity, was worth every sacrifice he might ever be asked to make, worth every sleepless night filled with worry, worth every anxious heartbeat that thundered in his chest whenever he sensed danger or imagined loss. It was a love that transcended all else, a love that demanded nothing but gave everything, a love that was unbreakable, eternal, and wholly transformative. As the city beyond the mansion's gates carried on with its habitual indifference, the clamor of commerce and ambition marching on heedlessly through streets and towers, Gabriel felt a startling clarity descend upon him. The life he had known, the life of sharp deals, strategic alliances, public adulation, and relentless, unyielding ambition, was over. It had ended not with a dramatic catastrophe, but with a quiet, profound revelation, a shift so subtle and yet so absolute that he knew he could never, ever return to the man he had once been. A new life had begun. One measured not in profit margins, not in stock indices, not in accolades or social prestige, but in the invisible metrics of love, care, and human devotion. This new life was counted in whispered lullabies that traveled on the hush of night, in the soft, tender caresses that soothed a restless child, in the steadfast, unwavering presence of a woman whose courage and patience had reshaped his understanding of strength and power. It was a life in which the ordinary gestures, the comforting of a tearful cheek, the soft guidance of a hand, the silent sharing of presence, were imbued with a significance so vast that it rendered all worldly measures meaningless. In this understanding, Gabriel felt simultaneously the immense weight of responsibility and the liberating ecstasy of purpose. Every decision he would make from this point forward, every move in the intricate game of his existence, would be filtered through the lens of preservation, protection, and reverence for this fragile miracle. And yet, paradoxically, he felt a freedom unlike any he had known. The freedom to love without restraint, to serve without expectation, to surrender to the profound beauty of a connection that neither wealth nor power nor fame could touch or tarnish. The miracle that Clarice had woven into the life of his son was now inseparable from his own soul, a light that illuminated even the darkest recesses of his heart, a guiding flame that promised that no matter the trials, the storms, or the cruelties of the outside world, this sanctuary, this delicate, sacred, untouchable universe of love would endure, eternal, radiant, and unassailable. Gabriel understood, with a clarity that felt both terrifying in its weight and exhilarating, in its promise that his life's true work had only just begun, that all the accolades, acquisitions, and conquests of his past now seemed hollow in comparison to the delicate, miraculous reality that had taken root in his heart. The victories he had once chased with relentless ambition, the deals that had defined his days, the titles and honors that had adorned his name, the endless accumulation of wealth that had once felt like power itself, now appeared almost laughably insignificant, almost meaningless, when set against the luminous, unspoken treasure he now held, the tender, sacred bond between Clarice, his son Henry, and himself. Each moment spent watching her, seeing the careful, gentle way she nurtured Henry, the soft, deliberate patience in every movement, every whisper, every comforting touch, was a revelation that struck him deeper than any professional triumph ever had. Every breath he drew, every heartbeat that thundered in his chest, resonated with a purpose that transcended money, authority, and prestige, echoing the quiet but irresistible truth that his life's meaning had shifted irrevocably, reshaping itself around a force far more profound than he had ever imagined. It was as if the universe itself had leaned in close, whispering that this fragile, miraculous connection was the pinnacle of all human experience, the truest measure of worth, the only achievement that mattered. Gabriel felt a swelling in his chest, a rising tide of awe and devotion, as if each pulse carried the weight of a promise he could neither ignore nor betray. He would defend this world at all costs. He would honor it, nurture it, and protect it with vigilance and tenderness that bordered on sacred ritual. There was no room now for carelessness, for superficiality, for the empty pursuits that had once consumed his days. Every choice, every thought, every action would be filtered through the lens of this new, transcendent purpose. The life he had known, the one of calculation, ambition, and public spectacle, had dissolved into shadows, leaving only this luminous, unshakable reality, radiant in its quiet, transformative power. And as he watched Clarice, the gentle guardian, the keeper of this fragile flame, cradle Henry with infinite patience, every line of her face softened by devotion, every sigh a song of comfort, Gabriel understood something profound. Some truths were not meant for the clamor of the outside world. Some miracles could never be captured in words. Some wonders existed only in the sacred, private spaces of the heart, where they could be witnessed reverently, without distortion or expectation. These were the moments that reshaped souls, that healed unseen wounds, that planted seeds of hope and courage that would endure long after the fleeting distractions of the material world had faded into oblivion. Clarice's presence, her careful, unassuming love, had revealed to him a dimension of existence he had never known, a dimension where patience, tenderness, and unwavering attention to another's needs carried more weight than any bank account, any mansion, any title. Gabriel felt a surge of gratitude so overwhelming it nearly brought him to his knees. He realized that life had handed him a rare, extraordinary gift, the chance to witness and participate in a miracle that unfolded not in grand gestures, not in public displays, but in the quiet, deliberate, selfless acts that shaped a child's heart, a mother's spirit, and a man's soul. He knew that to squander this gift, to fail to recognize its sacredness, would be a sin greater than any mistake he had ever made in business, in ambition, or in life. And so he made a silent vow, one that reverberated through every fiber of his being, echoing in his mind, in his chest, in the depths of his soul. He would be the vigilant guardian of this love, the unshakable protector of this miracle, the unwavering witness to the extraordinary in the ordinary, the extraordinary in the quiet, the extraordinary in the tender devotion that had quietly, irrevocably transformed his existence. He understood, too, that this journey would not be without trials, that the world beyond these walls might never understand, might never appreciate, might even attempt to disrupt or diminish the fragile miracle he now cherished. But he also knew, with a certainty that made his heart both tremble and soar, that nothing external could ever diminish the power of what had been born here in the quiet intimacy of their shared existence. Love like this, miraculous and unassailable, was impervious to greed, to envy, to the superficial judgments of those who could not perceive its depth. It was eternal, untouchable, and wholly transformative, a light that would guide him, Clarice, and Henry through whatever storms lay ahead. And as he remained there, rooted in place by the sheer weight and wonder of the moment, watching, feeling, absorbing every subtle movement, every infinitesimal detail of Clarice's devotion, Gabriel understood with a clarity so intense it seemed to vibrate through his bones that the infinite responsibility he bore was inseparable from the incomparable joy that had unexpectedly entered his life. He felt it in every fiber of his being, a sense of purpose so profound, so piercingly real, that it eclipsed every ambition, every conquest, every hollow victory that had once defined him. In that quiet, dimly lit room, with the soft glow of the lamp casting gentle shadows across the walls, with Henry nestled safely in Clarice's arms, and with the faint scent of her presence lingering in the air like a blessing, Gabriel realized something even deeper, a truth that transcended the mundane metrics of society. The essence of life, the truest measure of a man's success, was not found in the accumulation of wealth, not in the exercise of influence, not in the applause of strangers, not in the grandeur of public recognition or the hollow satisfaction of material conquest. True worth, he recognized, was measured in the ability to witness a miracle when it presents itself, not the kind heralded by fanfare or spectacle, but the subtle, quiet, almost invisible kind that emerges in acts of selflessness, in gestures performed without expectation, in love extended without calculation, in the tender attentiveness to the needs of another that asks nothing in return. It was in the courage to show up for someone, repeatedly, tirelessly, in the silence of unremarked hours, in the patience to nurture life in all its fragility, in the humility to allow oneself to be reshaped, renewed, and irrevocably transformed by the act of giving and receiving love so pure that it leaves no room for fear, for doubt, for pretense. Gabriel understood now that miracles did not announce themselves with trumpets. They whispered in the quiet, they glimmered in unnoticed details. They existed in the tender touch of a hand, the protective clasp of an arm, the soft, unwavering voice that says, without words, "You are safe, you are loved, you are seen." He felt a warmth rise in his chest, a fire of understanding that spread through him in waves, as if every beat of his heart, every inhale of breath, was synchronizing with the profound, unspoken truth of the world he had discovered, that life's deepest, most transformative magic lies not in what one achieves for oneself, but in what one safeguards, nurtures, and gives freely to others. And in that room, Bathed in the tender glow of love's quiet radiance, Gabriel's senses became acutely attuned to the miraculous choreography unfolding before him. The gentle rise and fall of Henry's small chest, the soft cadence of his breathing, the delicate sway of Clarice's body as she cradled him, the almost imperceptible sighs of comfort that seemed to thread the very air with invisible strands of hope, safety, and devotion. He understood, with a profundity that shook him to his very soul, that the life he had known, the life dominated by contracts, transactions, appearances, and meticulously calculated gains, was now a distant memory, a pale shadow compared to the luminous reality of this small, sacred world. The transformation that had occurred was not sudden, nor was it dramatic in the conventional sense, but it was seismic in its effect on the core of his being. Gabriel realized that the capacity to witness, to protect, and to honor this miracle, this fragile intersection of lives held together by trust and love, was the highest calling he could ever know. Every past achievement now seemed trivial, every accolade hollow, every pursuit of status meaningless, because none of them could hold a candle to the radiant, quiet power of love, freely given and faithfully received. And as he breathed in the warmth of the room, as the soft melody of Clarice's voice threaded through the stillness, as the gentle rhythm of Henry's breathing echoed in his chest, Gabriel knew, with a certainty that felt as solid and unshakable as the earth itself, that he had at last discovered the ultimate purpose of his existence. It was a purpose not written in balance sheets, not commemorated in public ceremonies, not recognized by society's measure of success, but etched into the marrow of his soul, indelible and eternal. His heart, once tethered to ambition and fear, now beat in quiet synchrony with the fragile miracle before him, a rhythm both sacred and exhilarating, a song of devotion and reverence that would guide him through every storm, every doubt, every challenge to come. Gabriel understood that this moment, this revelation, this extraordinary, unshakable bond was not a fleeting gift, but a lifelong charge, a covenant with the deepest, truest forces of life itself, to witness, to protect, to cherish, to honor, and to allow oneself to be irrevocably transformed by the love that had appeared as unexpectedly, as inexplicably, and as wonderfully as the first light of dawn, breaking over a night that had seemed endless. And in that knowledge, as the warmth of the room, the soft cadence of breathing, and the tender lullaby of love enveloped him, he felt for the first time in his life that his heart was not merely alive, it was awake, whole, and finally, eternally anchored in the miracle that would define him forever. The days that followed were filled with an uneasy harmony, a delicate rhythm that Gabriel struggled to maintain. While the mansion hummed with its usual quiet opulence, a subtle tension began to creep into the corners of their lives. Gabriel found himself increasingly vigilant, noticing shadows where there should be none, interpreting whispers as threats, and reading every glance as a potential intrusion into the fragile world he had vowed to protect. He had learned that love, while miraculous, was also perilous when exposed to the harshness of the outside world, to the curiosity of those who might misunderstand, to the greed and ambition that often lurked behind polite smiles. And yet, each time he looked at Clarice and Henry, he felt the surge of warmth and purpose rekindled within him, a reminder that no challenge, no matter how formidable, could diminish the force of what had been created in that quiet nursery. Clarice, for her part, moved with a quiet strength that Gabriel had never before fully appreciated. She navigated the mansion and its routines with a grace that seemed effortless, yet he could sense the constant vigilance beneath her serene exterior. She noticed every detail, anticipated every need, and seemed to understand Henry in ways that transcended language or logic. Her care was instinctual, unwavering, and infused with a tenderness that made Gabriel's chest tighten, with both admiration and a quiet, protective jealousy. He wanted to shield her from the world, to construct a barrier around the three of them that no force could breach. Yet he knew he could not impose that barrier without risking the freedom, the authenticity that made their bond so precious. Then, one afternoon, an incident occurred that shattered the fragile calm they had managed to preserve. A courier arrived with an official-looking envelope, stamped and sealed, bearing the insignia of a legal entity Gabriel had long ago dismissed as inconsequential. But as he tore open the envelope, his heart sank. A formal notice demanding information about Henry, a series of questions probing the boy's daily life, his care, and the circumstances surrounding his guardianship. Gabriel's mind raced. How had they found out? Who had the audacity to intrude on their sanctuary? And most importantly, what were their intentions? Clarice, sensing the tension, immediately moved to Henry's side, holding him closer, whispering soothing words, her eyes betraying a flicker of fear that only deepened Gabriel's determination. The legal notice was only the first of many waves that began to crash against the fragile shores of their lives. Small intrusions, innocuous on the surface, yet insidious in their cumulative effect, began to accumulate. Unexpected visitors, questions from acquaintances, the casual prying of neighbors who had always seemed harmless but now carried the weight of curiosity, turned into suspicion. Each instance tested Gabriel's patience, his judgment, his sense of control. And yet it was in the midst of these challenges that the miracle of Clarice's presence shone brightest. She met each new trial with calm, with unflinching dedication, and with the quiet wisdom of someone who had learned that the most profound victories are often invisible, unseen, and yet transformative beyond measure. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline and the mansion's lights flickered to life, Gabriel found himself alone in the study, the weight of responsibility pressing upon him like a tangible force. He replayed the events of the past days over and over in his mind, cataloguing potential threats, imagining worst-case scenarios, calculating every move he could take to ensure the safety of his son and the woman who had become the anchor of his soul. And yet, despite the anxiety that clawed at him, a quiet, persistent realization began to settle in his chest, that the true measure of his vigilance, of his courage, was not in preempting every danger, but in trusting, in surrendering in small ways to the unseen forces of love and care that had brought them together. He understood now that he could not control everything, that attempting to do so would only suffocate the fragile miracle they had nurtured, and that sometimes the greatest courage lay in letting go, in allowing the natural flow of connection, compassion, and trust to guide them through the storm. As the nights grew longer and the outside world pressed in with its relentless curiosity and quiet threats, Gabriel found solace in small rituals that became sacred markers of their sanctuary. The way Clarice hummed softly to Henry as she prepared his evening bath, the gentle murmur of her voice threading through the halls, the quiet laughter they shared over small private jokes, all of these moments became shields, talismans against the intrusion of doubt, fear, or malice. Gabriel began to recognize that while the world outside might be indifferent, cruel, or intrusive, the universe within these walls responded to the authenticity of their care, the sincerity of their love, and the unwavering commitment they had to one another. Each day reaffirmed the truth he had come to cherish, that miracles, though fragile, are resilient when nurtured, protected, and honored with devotion that surpasses mere thought, reaching into the very essence of the heart. And yet the challenges did not cease. One late night, as a storm raged outside, Gabriel caught sight of a figure lurking near the perimeter of the property, a shadow that moved with intent, yet without clarity. Panic surged in his chest, a primal response he could not deny. He wanted to rush, to confront, to protect, yet he also recognized that fear itself could fracture the sanctuary they had built. He took a deep breath, centering himself, feeling the pulse of Henry's life within the walls they had made sacred, feeling Clarice's unwavering presence beside him, and made a decision. He would meet this threat, not with brute force or paranoia, but with a calm vigilance that honored both the danger and the sanctity of what they had created. It was in that moment, standing at the edge of shadow and light, that Gabriel understood the final, unshakable truth of their bond, that love, true, miraculous love, does not exist in isolation. It does not thrive in secrecy alone, nor in fear, nor in the hollow corridors of power. It flourishes in courage, in vulnerability, in the relentless commitment to the well-being of those who have entrusted their hearts to your care. Every challenge, every threat, every unforeseen intrusion became not a threat to their world, but a testament to its strength, a reminder that what had been forged in quiet devotion and tender care could withstand even the most insistent storms. As the first raindrops struck the windows, splattering against the glass with the rhythmic cadence of a distant drum, Gabriel felt a profound sense of equilibrium, as if the very atmosphere around him had shifted to acknowledge the delicate, sacred balance that now defined his existence. Each drop, cold and insistent against the warm glow of the room, seemed to echo a truth he had only recently begun to grasp, that life's greatest treasures were never material, never bound by contracts or currency, but lived in the fragile, quiet, tender moments where love manifests unbidden, unmeasured, and unassailably powerful. He watched Clarice moving through the room with the ease of someone attuned to unseen rhythms, her hands brushing Henry's hair, smoothing the blanket across his tiny body, and whispering soft assurances that were invisible to the outside world, yet monumental to the one who mattered most. In her presence, he sensed the universe bending toward an order far more meaningful than any he had ever known, an order defined not by power or status, but by vigilance, tenderness, and unwavering dedication to the fragile lives entrusted to him. Gabriel's mind, usually a whirlwind of calculations, contingencies, and strategies, slowed to a reflective, almost reverent pace. He considered the myriad ways in which life could conspire against them, the unforeseen illnesses, the careless mistakes, the casual cruelty of strangers, and the weight of expectations imposed by a world that prized wealth above all else. Each potential threat tightened his chest, a knot of anxiety tempered only by the radiance of the miracle before him. Henry's soft breathing, even and rhythmic, became a kind of heartbeat for his own soul, reminding him that the ultimate purpose of his life had crystallized into something profoundly simple and yet infinitely complex: to protect, to nurture, to honor, and to love, with a courage that transcended fear, that endured beyond doubt, and that refused compromise in the face of uncertainty. He could feel it in every fiber of his being, the way the warmth of Clarice's body radiated into the room, the subtle scent of her hair mingling with the faint, comforting aroma of the rain-soaked world outside, the tender way she bent over Henry as though she were shaping the very essence of his soul with each touch, each whispered word, each careful, deliberate movement. In that small, luminous space, Gabriel realized that life's true victories were measured not in public acclaim, not in titles, not in the accumulation of riches, but in the steadfast preservation of what was most fragile, most sacred, most transcendent. He understood that the bond he shared with Clarice and Henry was not merely emotional, it was spiritual, elemental, unassailable, a fortress forged from trust, courage, and the quiet, tireless acts of devotion that went unnoticed by everyone else, yet carried within them the weight of eternity. A shiver ran through him as he pressed his hands to the windowsill, watching the rain cascade down in silvery threads. And he felt a clarity so intense it was almost painful. Every trial, every sleepless night, every pang of doubt and every surge of hope had converged to bring him here, to this precise alignment of heart, soul, and purpose. He vowed, silently yet with unshakable intensity, that no force in the world would ever fracture this bond, would ever undermine the sanctuary of love they had built. would ever touch the miraculous connection that had transformed his existence into something luminous, irreplaceable and eternal. Every heartbeat became a sacred drum, each breath a reaffirmation of his commitment, each flicker of thought a pledge to meet life with courage, to protect without faltering, and to nurture without expectation or condition. And as he stood there, fully immersed in the quiet grandeur of this revelation, Gabriel understood with a depth that resonated from his bones to the tips of his fingers that the rain, the storm, the darkened skies outside were not threats, but mirrors of the challenges that life would continue to offer. Yet he no longer feared them. He had seen what could emerge from tenderness, what could be built from patience, what could endure through courage, faith, and love freely given. He knew with absolute certainty that the world might never recognize the significance of the miracle unfolding in that room, might never understand the profound depth of the devotion he and Clarice shared for Henry, might never grasp the silent, seismic transformation occurring in a man who had learned that life's ultimate purpose was not to acquire, but to give, not to dominate, but to protect, not to impress, but to witness and preserve the extraordinary within the ordinary. And in that realization, as the rain fell steadily against the mansion windows, casting shimmering, ever-shifting patterns of light and shadow across the walls, Gabriel felt a quiet, yet overwhelming surge of triumph, the kind that did not come from conquest, accolades, or public recognition, but from an intimate, almost sacred understanding of the profound responsibilities and immeasurable gifts that life had bestowed upon him. He felt the weight and the exhilaration of it all coiling in his chest, pressing against his ribs in a way that was at once grounding and electrifying, as though every heartbeat, every breath, carried the confirmation of a truth he had been chasing unknowingly his entire life, that the most extraordinary treasures are neither tangible nor fleeting, but fragile, invisible, eternal. He thought of the world outside these walls, with its relentless noise, its shallow valuations, its pursuit of power, prestige, and material gain, and he realized with startling clarity that none of it could touch what he now held. None of it could measure, diminish, or distort the sacred bond he shared with Clarice and Henry. The mansion itself, usually a monument to wealth and ambition, seemed to bow in quiet acknowledgement of the miracle within its walls. The rain, pattering against the glass, became a symphony of solace and affirmation, each drop a reminder of impermanence, of the fleeting nature of all things, but also of the resilience of what is nurtured with patience, love, and vigilance. He watched the light bend through the droplets, scattering across the polished floors, the velvet drapes, and the soft contours of Henry's small, peaceful form. Every shadow, every reflection, every glimmer of refracted light seemed to carry a message. The world could rage, crumble, or ignore them, but inside this fragile sanctuary, life had distilled its purest essence into the quiet, miraculous act of love, freely given and tenderly received. Gabriel's mind, for once, was not occupied with the mechanics of wealth, strategy, or status. Instead, it swirled with memories, reflections, and reverent awe. He remembered the countless deals that had once filled his days, the endless hours chasing recognition, the hollow victories that had left him restless, yearning, and unsatisfied. And in contrast, this moment, this reality, felt boundless, infinite, and infinitely more real. The intimacy of Clarice holding Henry, the softness of her voice, the gentleness of her hands brushing against his child's skin, the way she seemed to anticipate every need before it was voiced, all of it converged into a vision of life so profoundly sacred that it eclipsed every achievement he had ever known. Gabriel understood that he had not merely witnessed a miracle, he had become its steward, its guardian, and its eternal witness, charged with preserving its purity against the ceaseless currents of a world that might never understand, might never believe, and might never see. A tremor of gratitude ran through him, accompanied by a deep, almost physical sense of responsibility, a visceral understanding that this treasure, this fragile, irreplaceable world, demanded more than affection. It demanded vigilance, patience, courage, and humility. Every thought that crossed his mind, every whisper of concern, every spark of hope was now anchored in the commitment to protect the miraculous bond that had transformed his life. He envisioned the years ahead, the sleepless nights, the unexpected trials, the small, tender victories that would compose their days, and he felt neither fear nor fatigue, only a burning resolve, a luminous purpose that seemed to radiate from the core of his being outward, suffusing the room with a quiet intensity that even the storm outside could not disturb. This was no fleeting triumph, no ephemeral satisfaction. It was a foundational truth, a permanent shift in the axis of his existence. The sanctuary they had created, a world woven from trust, courage, devotion, and love, so tender that it shimmered even in the smallest gestures, would endure, untouched by the indifferent tides of fate, unswayed by those who measured life by numbers, influence, or superficial acclaim. It would endure because it was real, because it was chosen freely, because it was tenderly nurtured, and because it carried within it the profound capacity to transform not only Henry's life, not only his own, but the very essence of those who came to know it, even peripherally, through the resonance of its truth. And Gabriel knew deep in the marrow of his bones, with a certainty that resonated through every fiber of his being, that this fragile, luminous, tender bond was the only victory that truly mattered, the only legacy worth leaving, the only measure of a life fully and meaningfully lived. He understood as no amount of wealth, no series of strategic triumphs, no accolades from a world obsessed with power and appearances could ever have taught him that all the things he had once chased with relentless ambition now seemed hollow, inconsequential, almost laughably insignificant when compared to the quiet, steady miracle that pulsed before him in the small chest of his child, cradled tenderly by the selfless hands of Clarice. Every challenge he would face from that moment onward, the shadows that would inevitably seek to test, threaten, or diminish this miracle, the temptations of his former life, the seductive whispers of status, control, and worldly accumulation, the relentless pressures of expectation from a society that measured worth in numbers, in appearances, in shallow victories, would pale utterly and completely before the luminous, unassailable reality of what he now held and vowed to protect. He felt a deep, almost sacred tremor run through him, a mingling of awe and responsibility that pressed against his ribs and filled his lungs with the weight of purpose. This love, this astonishing, resilient, pure force, was not merely an emotion, not merely a moment of fleeting joy, but a living, breathing entity, fragile yet indestructible, delicate yet immeasurably strong, capable of weathering the harshest storms, soothing the deepest wounds, and enduring beyond fear, beyond doubt, beyond the indifferent march of time itself. And as the rain fell outside in its steady, mesmerizing rhythm, drumming against the windows like a distant, sacred heartbeat, Gabriel felt the pulse of this miracle echoing through every corner of the room, through every shadow and beam of light intertwining with his own heartbeat, as if life itself had slowed to honor this sacred moment. He watched Clarice with a reverence that bordered on worship, the way she held Henry with infinite patience, her every movement deliberate yet effortless, her eyes soft pools of compassion and understanding, her voice a melody of warmth, comfort, and security that threaded the room with a palpable sense of sanctuary. Each sigh, each blink, each tender gesture became a lesson, a revelation, a testament to the power of love, unbound by expectation, untainted by ego, unshakable in the face of life's inevitable trials. Gabriel's mind swirled with memories of his former life, The relentless ambition, the empty victories, the sleepless nights spent calculating, negotiating, striving, and often feeling a gnawing emptiness despite outward success. And he saw now, with painful clarity, how utterly meaningless those pursuits had been in comparison. The triumph he now felt was immeasurable, unquantifiable, profound and eternal, born not of conquest or recognition, but of devotion freely given, nurtured with care, and protected with unwavering resolve. His thoughts stretched outward, envisioning the years to come, the quiet mornings of shared smiles, the nights filled with whispered lullabies, the subtle milestones that might appear mundane to the world but would resonate as profound markers of growth and love within this intimate, miraculous universe. He imagined every hardship that could possibly arrive, the illnesses, the unforeseen accidents, the storms of the outside world seeking to intrude, and he felt a resolute strength rise within him. A protective force that was not built from intimidation, power, or fear, but from the deep, inexhaustible courage that arises only when one has touched, held, and become accountable for a miracle. And in that vision he saw himself, Clarice, and Henry standing together, a fortress of love, impervious to the world's apathy, its cruelty, its misunderstandings, their hearts entwined in a bond that no wealth could buy, no fame could replicate, no force could destroy. Gabriel's body trembled with the intensity of the realization. He had become the steward of something so rare, so precious, so ineffably profound, that it would define him more than any title, any fortune, any achievement ever had. And yet, alongside the awe, there was humility, a recognition that this gift was not earned by him, but entrusted to him, a sacred responsibility that required vigilance, patience, and unyielding love. Every glance at Henry, every smile from Clarice, every echo of laughter or sigh of comfort became a vow, a silent, sacred promise etched into the depths of his being, to protect, to cherish, to honor, to nurture, and to allow this miracle to grow and flourish in its own time, its own way, untouched by the corrosive influence of greed, ambition, or fear. And in that realization, as the soft, diffused light refracted off the rain-slicked windows, splashing the room with fleeting, shimmering patterns that danced across walls, furniture, and the sleeping figure of his son, Gabriel felt an inner peace so profound it transcended mere thought, so enveloping it seemed to dissolve the boundaries between his body, his mind, and the very essence of the world around him. Every beat of his heart reverberated with a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to echo the cadence of the universe itself, as if life itself had paused for a moment to honor the fragile, luminous miracle he had been entrusted with. The room, suffused with the gentle patter of rain, the faint scent of wet stone and polished wood, and the soft warmth radiating from Clarice as she cradled Henry, became a sanctuary unlike any cathedral, palace, or hall of power he had ever known. In that silence, Gabriel could feel the weight of eternity pressing gently, insistently, against the corners of his consciousness, reminding him that some truths could never be measured by gold, fame, or influence, but only felt in the quiet surrender to wonder, awe, and love. The miracle they had created together, a fragile, enduring, radiant world of trust, devotion, and selfless love, stood impervious to the erosions of time, to the corrosive bite of fear, to the harshness of the outside world that valued power over tenderness and ambition over authenticity. It was a living testament to the extraordinary strength of quiet, ordinary acts, performed with unrelenting care, acts that seemed invisible to the world, yet held the power to reshape lives in ways both profound and eternal. He understood now that the greatest triumphs were not the ones heralded by applause, nor the victories celebrated in boardrooms or palaces, but the victories that occurred in these intimate, unseen spaces where hearts opened fully, where courage manifested not as conquest, but as patience, presence, and unwavering dedication to the fragile life of another. Every whispered song, every gentle rocking motion, every soft sigh of comfort exchanged between Clarice and Henry was a note in a symphony that Gabriel had only just begun to comprehend, a composition so perfect in its simplicity, so ineffably moving in its sincerity, that it left him trembling with awe and gratitude. He felt an almost sacred thrill coursing through his veins, a mixture of humility, reverence, and exhilaration as the depth of the miracle's significance settled into every fiber of his being. He thought of the years that lay ahead, of the countless nights he would sit beside this small, wondrous life, guarding it with an intensity that was as tender as it was unyielding. He imagined the storms they might face, the unexpected hardships, the fragile trials of human existence, and he felt a fierce, resolute strength rise within him, a determination so absolute it seemed to radiate from the very marrow of his bones. No force in the world could tarnish this love. No shadow could dim its light. No lapse in vigilance could undo the sacred trust that had been placed in him. It was a vigilance born not of fear or control, but of reverence, gratitude, and a recognition of the miraculous nature of life itself. And as he gazed upon Clarice, the embodiment of patience, courage, and quiet selflessness, and upon Henry, whose very existence now seemed to pulse with an almost divine resonance, Gabriel felt an overwhelming surge of emotion so vast it threatened to unmoor him from the very ground he stood upon. In that moment, every memory, every mistake, every lonely victory he had ever pursued paled into insignificance, replaced by the radiant, irreplaceable truth that he now bore witness to something profoundly eternal. It was not simply love that filled the room, it was the essence of life distilled into its purest, most luminous form, a force at once fragile and indestructible, delicate yet unyielding, whispering across the spaces between hearts and souls with a language older than time itself. Gabriel's chest tightened, his throat constricted with the fullness of a realization so staggering, so complete, that it felt as though the universe itself had conspired to place this moment before him, a revelation of purpose, of meaning, of ultimate human triumph. He reflected upon the countless hours he had spent chasing wealth, power, influence, and recognition, and how each fleeting victory had left him hollow, unfulfilled, yearning for a sense of true significance he had never before grasped. And now, standing in the gentle, warm cocoon of this rain-washed room, watching Clarice cradle Henry with infinite tenderness and devotion, Gabriel understood that all the riches in the world, all the accolades he had ever amassed, all the carefully constructed facades of prestige and importance, were meaningless in comparison to this fragile, miraculous bond. This was life itself distilled into its purest form, unwavering attention, selfless devotion, and the courage to love fully without expectation, without measure, without reservation. And the beauty of it, the almost unbearable, breathtaking beauty, was that it existed quietly, unobtrusively, invisible to all but those who possessed the eyes, the hearts, and the souls to truly see. Every detail of the moment engraved itself upon Gabriel's consciousness, the way the soft rain traced delicate rivulets down the windows, casting shimmering, fluid patterns of light across the polished floors and the walls of the room, the rhythmic cadence of Henry's breathing, as steady and innocent as a heartbeat in the dawn of creation, the faint, comforting scent of Clarice, a mingling of warmth, care, and something ineffably human and divine all at once. He felt the weight and wonder of the responsibility now resting upon him, the inescapable gravity of being a guardian of a miracle that had no currency in the world outside, but was priceless in the realm that truly mattered, the realm of hearts, of spirits, of souls, intertwined in perfect, selfless harmony. Gabriel's thoughts spiraled outward, envisioning the countless days, weeks, and years ahead, moments both tender and testing, moments of triumph and potential heartbreak, moments when the fragility of this miracle might be threatened by the indifference, cruelty, or ignorance of the world beyond these walls. And yet, with each imagined challenge, a surge of resolve rose within him, a resolve forged not from fear, not from pride, not from a desire to control, but from pure, unshakable love, a love that would guide his every action, inform every decision, and define every waking thought. He understood, in a way that penetrated the very marrow of his being, that to safeguard this bond, to nurture it, to allow it to flourish in its unencumbered grace, was the highest calling a man could attain, the ultimate purpose, the truest measure of a life well lived. And as Gabriel stood there, bathed in the shimmer of rain-soaked light, listening to the quiet rhythm of Henry's breaths, feeling the gentle warmth emanating from Clarice, he recognized something that would remain with him forever. This love, this luminous, tender, eternal bond, was not only theirs, it was a force of creation in itself. It was a testament to the capacity of the human heart to transcend fear, to rise above cynicism, to discover and protect beauty in its most fragile, most radiant form. It was eternal, immutable, sacred, beyond the reach of mortality or misfortune, a living flame that would endure long after wealth, power, and status had faded into dust. And in that understanding, Gabriel felt the deepest, most profound peace he had ever known, a peace that expanded beyond the physical confines of the room, beyond the limitations of time and space, resonating with the infinite, the eternal, the unspoken truth that there exists no greater victory than to witness, cherish, and protect a miracle born of love, freely given. Tenderly nurtured and fiercely guarded, it was a quiet triumph, yet it filled the room with a brilliance that rivaled the sun. It was a monumental realization, yet it existed in the smallest, most intimate gestures, the soft murmur of a lullaby, the gentle rocking of a child's body, the unwavering, unspoken devotion of one soul to another. Gabriel's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow but of awe, gratitude, and the staggering recognition of a life forever transformed. And as he whispered, silently to himself, a vow carved into the deepest recesses of his being, he knew beyond any doubt, beyond question, beyond fear, that this fragile, radiant, unshakable bond of love was the only treasure worth guarding, the only legacy worth leaving, the only miracle worth cherishing, not just for a lifetime, but for all time, eternally, unendingly, gloriously eternal. And as he gazed upon Clarice, the embodiment of patience, courage, and quiet selflessness, and upon Henry, whose very existence now seemed to pulse with an almost divine resonance, Gabriel felt an overwhelming surge of emotion so vast it threatened to unmoor him from the very ground he stood upon. In that moment, every memory, every mistake, every lonely victory he had ever pursued paled into insignificance, replaced by the radiant, irreplaceable truth that he now bore witness to something profoundly eternal. It was not simply love that filled the room. It was the essence of life distilled into its purest, most luminous form, a force at once fragile and indestructible, delicate yet unyielding, whispering across the spaces between hearts and souls with a language older than time itself. Gabriel's chest tightened, his throat constricted with the fullness of a realization so staggering, so complete, that it felt as though the universe itself had conspired to place this moment before him, a revelation of purpose, of meaning, of ultimate human triumph. He reflected upon the countless hours he had spent, chasing wealth, power, influence, and recognition, and how each fleeting victory had left him hollow, unfulfilled, yearning for a sense of true significance he had never before grasped. And now, standing in the gentle, warm cocoon of this rain-washed room, watching Clarice cradle Henry with infinite tenderness and devotion, Gabriel understood that all the riches in the world, all the accolades he had ever amassed, All the carefully constructed facades of prestige and importance were meaningless in comparison to this fragile, miraculous bond. This was life itself, distilled into its purest form, unwavering attention, selfless devotion, and the courage to love fully without expectation, without measure, without reservation. And the beauty of it, the almost unbearable, breathtaking beauty, was that it existed quietly, unobtrusively, invisible to all but those who possessed the eyes, the hearts, and the souls to truly see. Every detail of the moment engraved itself upon Gabriel's consciousness, the way the soft rain traced delicate rivulets down the windows, casting shimmering fluid patterns of light across the polished floors and the walls of the room. The rhythmic cadence of Henry's breathing, as steady and innocent as a heartbeat in the dawn of creation. The faint, comforting scent of Clarice, a mingling of warmth, care, and something ineffably human and divine all at once. He felt the weight and wonder of the responsibility now resting upon him, the inescapable gravity of being a guardian of a miracle that had no currency in the world outside, but was priceless in the realm that truly mattered, the realm of hearts, of spirits, of souls intertwined in perfect, selfless harmony. Gabriel's thoughts spiraled outward, envisioning the countless days, weeks, and years ahead, moments both tender and testing, moments of triumph and potential heartbreak, moments when the fragility of this miracle might be threatened by the indifference, cruelty, or ignorance of the world beyond these walls. And yet, with each imagined challenge, a surge of resolve rose within him, a resolve forged not from fear, not from pride, not from a desire to control, but from pure, unshakable love. A love that would guide his every action, inform every decision, and define every waking thought. He understood, in a way that penetrated the very marrow of his being, that to safeguard this bond, to nurture it, to allow it to flourish in its unencumbered grace, was the highest calling a man could attain, the ultimate purpose, the truest measure of a life well lived. And as Gabriel stood there, bathed in the shimmer of rain-soaked light, listening to the quiet rhythm of Henry's breaths, feeling the gentle warmth emanating from Clarice, he recognized something that would remain with him forever. This love, this luminous, tender, eternal bond, was not only theirs, it was a force of creation in itself. It was a testament to the capacity of the human heart to transcend fear, to rise above cynicism, to discover and protect beauty in its most fragile, most radiant form. It was eternal, immutable, sacred, beyond the reach of mortality or misfortune, a living flame that would endure long after wealth, power, and status had faded into dust. And in that understanding, Gabriel felt the deepest, most profound peace he had ever known, a peace that expanded beyond the physical confines of the room, beyond the limitations of time and space, resonating with the infinite, the eternal, the unspoken truth that there exists no greater victory than to witness, cherish, and protect a miracle born of love, freely given, tenderly nurtured, and fiercely guarded. It was a quiet triumph, yet its radiance filled the room with a brilliance that seemed to rival the sun itself, casting a warm, golden glow that seemed to penetrate not only the space around them, but the very core of Gabriel's being. It was a monumental realization, profound and transformative, yet it existed entirely in the smallest, most intimate gestures, the soft, soothing murmur of a lullaby that carried with it centuries of unspoken care, the gentle, rhythmic rocking of a child's body, perfectly synchronized with the heartbeat of the universe, the unwavering, unspoken devotion of one soul to another that needed no words, no recognition, no external validation to assert its power. Every flutter of Henry's eyelids, every subtle sigh of contentment, every infinitesimal movement of Clarice's hands as she adjusted his blanket or whispered softly into his ear became, in Gabriel's eyes, a revelation, a testament to the enduring power of love, freely given and tenderly received. Gabriel's chest tightened with a mixture of awe and humility, a sensation that felt almost physical, pressing down on his ribs and pooling deep in his stomach. Tears welled in his eyes, not of sorrow, nor of regret, nor of longing, but of pure, unfiltered wonder, gratitude, and a staggering recognition of a life forever transformed. He could feel in the very marrow of his bones the seismic shift that had occurred within him, the irrevocable realignment of his values, his priorities, and his purpose. All the pursuits that had once dominated his life, wealth, influence, status, accolades, suddenly seemed hollow, distant, almost irrelevant in comparison to the luminous miracle unfolding before him in the quiet of that room. Each subtle motion, each whispered word, each infinitesimal act of care was an affirmation of a truth Gabriel had never fully understood until this moment, that the most extraordinary treasures in life are invisible to the eye, intangible to the hand, and immeasurable by any worldly standard. As he watched Clarice gently cradle Henry, her eyes soft with love, her every movement deliberate yet effortlessly tender, Gabriel understood that this bond, the delicate, radiant, unshakable connection between them, was simultaneously fragile and indestructible, delicate yet infinite. It existed beyond time, beyond circumstance, beyond the reach of those who might try to quantify, control, or diminish it. It was a miracle, yes, but also a covenant, a sacred promise, silently exchanged between hearts, unbreakable because it was built not on fear, obligation, or expectation, but on pure, selfless, enduring love. In that moment, Gabriel felt his soul expand, as if the universe itself had opened its arms and whispered a truth that had eluded him his entire life, that the ultimate purpose, the truest achievement, the one legacy that could survive the ravages of time, adversity, and mortality, was to protect, nurture, and honor the delicate miracles that emerge when hearts are fully, courageously, and selflessly committed to one another. He whispered silently to himself, a vow carved not on paper, nor uttered aloud, but etched in the deepest recesses of his being, where nothing could alter it, where it would remain eternal, that he would guard this fragile, radiant, unshakable bond of love. With every ounce of strength, every beat of his heart, every breath that filled his lungs, that he would honor it not merely in grand gestures, but in the quiet, patient attentiveness of daily life, in the vigilance of silent presence, in the reverent care with which he would witness its growth, its flourishing, its imperceptible yet profound impact upon the world, that he would celebrate it, nurture it, and ensure its endurance, not only for the lifetime he could measure, but for all time, eternally, unendingly, gloriously eternal. The room itself seemed to pulse with this truth, as though every wall, every beam of wood, every surface had absorbed the weight of the love and devotion contained within its confines, and now vibrated with a quiet, profound resonance. The soft light of dawn refracted across the rain-drenched windows, scattering shards of gold and amber across walls, floor, and ceiling, turning the ordinary into a cathedral of light and shadow, a sacred space where the divine seemed to brush against the edges of the tangible, where every flicker of illumination traced the contours of something greater than the sum of its parts. Each droplet of rain, each wavering reflection, seemed to pulse in rhythm with the beating of Gabriel's own heart, echoing the fragile, luminous miracle that had taken root within these walls. It was as if the universe itself had conspired in ways subtle yet unfathomably precise to honor this moment, to frame it in a light that could neither be manufactured nor fully captured, a light that existed solely to celebrate the ineffable bond that now defined the center of Gabriel's existence. Gabriel felt a rush of humility so profound it brought tears to his eyes, of reverence so deep It left him trembling in place, of awe so encompassing that it seemed to stretch and expand through every cell, every fiber, every breath of his being. He was struck by the realization that this was not merely love, not a simple or transient emotion that could be quantified or possessed. It was something living, breathing, and eternal, a force in the universe that carried within it the weight of patience, the depth of courage, the quiet power of selflessness, and the unyielding strength of devotion. It was more enduring than the coldest, most impervious stone, more resilient than the fiercest, most relentless storm, more radiant than the brightest sun, and infinitely more precious than any accumulation of wealth, any acquisition of status, any hollow accolade that human society might offer. Here, in the stillness and sacred light of that room, Gabriel understood with absolute clarity that no amount of money, no measure of power, no triumph of human ambition could ever compare to the brilliance, the resilience, the sanctity of the love that now coursed through this fragile sanctuary. And in that sacred, ineffable silence, as Clarice's gentle lullaby wrapped the room in a cocoon of warmth, as the faint, rhythmic rise and fall of Henry's chest seemed to echo the heartbeat of the world itself, Gabriel experienced a certainty so profound that it transcended thought, defied language, and dissolved any lingering traces of doubt or fear. He knew beyond any shadow of question that this delicate, radiant, eternal miracle of love was the only treasure worth guarding, the only legacy worth leaving, the ultimate victory in a life that had finally, irrevocably, discovered its purpose. He felt a surge of gratitude so intense it threatened to overwhelm his senses, a joy so deep it seemed to vibrate through every nerve, a peace so complete it was as if the universe itself had reached inside him and filled the empty spaces with warmth, light, and infinite promise. Each breath he drew, each blink of his eyes, each faint thrum of emotion that pulsed through his being was a prayer of thanksgiving, an acknowledgement of the extraordinary gift he had been entrusted with. And in that revelation, Gabriel understood, with a simplicity so pure it bordered on the miraculous, a truth that would forever alter the trajectory of his life. Some miracles cannot be bought, some treasures cannot be earned, some victories cannot be won by ambition, by force, or by calculation. They exist quietly, often unseen, often unrecognized by the world at large, and yet their power is absolute. They demand nothing, yet transform everything. They are witnessed in acts of courage performed in silence, in gestures of devotion unnoticed by all but the recipient, in moments of vulnerability met with patience and love. They are the miracles that shape lives, that heal wounds that wealth cannot mend, that illuminate hearts in ways that no worldly power could ever hope to achieve. Gabriel's mind expanded with the immensity of this realization, touching every corner of his imagination, every depth of his heart, every fragile chamber of his soul. He could envision a future defined not by the hollow markers of human ambition, but by the quiet, tender, unyielding stewardship of the love and life he now held. He saw himself guiding Henry with patience and wisdom, standing as a protector not of walls and possessions, but of heart and spirit, nurturing a child with the understanding that true strength comes from empathy, courage, and the unwavering commitment to another's well-being. He saw Clarice, the gentle, tireless guardian of Henry's soul, moving through their days with a quiet dignity and selflessness that reflected the very essence of miracles themselves, and he understood that she too was a treasure beyond measure, a partner in the creation of something eternal, whose presence would define the contours of his existence as surely as any heartbeat or breath. And with all of this, Gabriel felt the world expand beyond the physical, beyond the temporal, beyond the reach of ordinary perception, as though every boundary he had once known, the walls of his mansion, the rigid structures of society, the carefully cultivated facade of power, the endless pursuit of wealth and recognition, had dissolved into a vast, infinite horizon of clarity and purpose. The rain continued its gentle descent outside, each drop a delicate percussion against the glass, echoing in his chest like the heartbeat of the universe itself, each pattern of refracted light scattering across the walls and floor, a testament to the miraculous truth he had finally grasped, that life's most profound treasures are never measured by human standards, never acquired through ambition or influence, never celebrated in the eyes of strangers. They are witnessed quietly, discovered in the tender, unnoticed moments, nurtured in silence, and cherished with a devotion that transcends every fleeting desire, every temporal accomplishment, every shallow triumph of the material world. And Gabriel felt, deep in his bones, that he was standing at the intersection of eternity, and now that the very air around him shimmered with the recognition of what had been created. A living, breathing miracle, fragile yet unbreakable, luminous yet understated, eternal yet intimately present in every heartbeat, every breath, every quiet murmur of love that filled the room. He realized with startling intensity that to witness, protect, and nurture this miracle was to participate in something far greater than himself. To engage with the divine without leaving the realm of the mortal, to touch the infinite while remaining anchored in the finite, to embrace the eternal while holding the fragility of the present in one's hands. It was to understand, in the deepest recesses of his being, that the most potent forces in life are not power, prestige, or fortune, but courage, empathy, and the unselfish act of loving wholly and without expectation. Each note of Clarice's lullaby, each subtle, instinctive movement she made as she cradled Henry, each sigh of contentment that passed through the child's lips, resonated in Gabriel's soul like a sacred hymn, affirming the profound truth that he had stumbled upon. Some of life's most extraordinary miracles are invisible to the world, intangible to those who measure existence by tangible wealth, yet their impact is absolute, transformative, and eternal. As he gazed upon Clarice, the very embodiment of patience, courage, and quiet, selfless devotion, and upon Henry, whose small body seemed to pulse with a rhythm that harmonized with the subtle music of the universe, Gabriel felt a deep, almost overwhelming gratitude wash through him. It was gratitude for having been entrusted with a glimpse of the divine, for having been chosen as a guardian not of fortune or power, but of something immeasurably precious, the tender, radiant, indestructible bond of love forged between a mother figure and a child, and mirrored in his own commitment to protect and honor them. He understood with a clarity that made the room itself seem to hum in recognition that the ultimate triumph of life was not the accumulation of things, but the creation, preservation, and recognition of love in its purest form, a love that cannot be coerced, bought, or manufactured, a love that appears unexpectedly, blossoms quietly, and endures against every odds, shaping destinies, healing wounds, and illuminating the hearts of all who are fortunate enough to witness even the faintest reflection of its brilliance. The room itself seemed to pulse with this truth, each fragment of light reflected in the rain-streaked windows, each shadow thrown across the polished floors, each quiet exhalation from Clarice or Henry, was imbued with a sacred energy, a subtle yet undeniable confirmation that the universe itself acknowledged the significance of what had transpired here. Gabriel felt an almost physical connection to something greater than himself, a tether to a reality that had always existed, but which he had never fully perceived, that the ordinary, when touched by love, becomes extraordinary, that life, when measured by moments of selflessness, courage, and tender devotion, reveals a depth and resonance far beyond anything material, that miracles, though often quiet and hidden, possess a power that can redefine the trajectory of existence itself. He could feel it in the tightening of his chest, in the warmth that surged through his limbs, in the hum of his blood as it carried not just life, but reverence, awe, and the profound responsibility of stewardship over what could not be quantified, but only honored, cherished, and preserved. And as he watched, as the rain continued to fall in its soft, hypnotic rhythm, casting liquid silver across the room, as Clarice's lullaby wove a protective cocoon around the small, fragile life in her arms, Gabriel understood more fully than ever before that he was no longer merely a man defined by ambition or wealth. He was a guardian of a miracle. He was a witness to the transcendence of love. He was a participant in a narrative that extended far beyond the temporal, that bridged the mortal and the eternal, that would echo across time in ways unseen, but infinitely significant. Every challenge he might face in the world beyond these walls, every shadow seeking to test, every force of chaos, every echo of doubt or fear that once might have swayed him, now paled before the luminous reality before him. Nothing could diminish it, nothing could corrode it, nothing could overshadow the radiant, tender, unassailable bond that had been forged here, in quiet courage, patient care, and unbroken devotion. And in that understanding, he felt the most complete peace he had ever known, a serenity that encompassed not only himself, but the very air, the very light, the very pulse of the universe, as though all existence had tilted, even if briefly, to honor this extraordinary, fragile, eternal miracle. Gabriel realized finally, with a depth of certainty that shook him to his core, that life's ultimate triumphs are neither sought nor won in public, that the most profound victories leave no trace on balance sheets or in newspapers, and that the most enduring legacies cannot be recorded, printed, or displayed. They are inscribed directly onto the fabric of the human soul, subtle yet indelible, invisible yet unshakable, quiet yet resounding with the power of eternity. And in that quiet, sacred recognition, he felt the full weight and the full joy of his responsibility to witness, to protect, to nurture, to honor, to love, and to allow himself to be forever transformed by the miracle that had been placed into his life. This was no ordinary love, no fleeting moment, no transient delight. This was a force of nature, a gift of the universe, a luminous, enduring, unbreakable testament to what life could be when courage, patience, empathy, and devotion converged in the purest form. And so Gabriel stood, silently, as if he had become part of the room itself, part of the sacred choreography of light, rain, and breathing life. He observed the small movements, the tilt of Henry's head, the gentle press of Clarice's hand against his cheek, the soft sighs that punctuated the lullaby, and knew, with a certainty that filled every fiber of his being, that this was the only treasure worth guarding, the only legacy worth leaving, the only victory in life that truly mattered. It was eternal, it was sacred, it was inviolable, it was theirs. And in that space, at that precise moment, Gabriel finally understood the full, extraordinary meaning of being truly, irrevocably blessed, to witness a miracle, to protect a treasure, to love without measure, and to be forever changed by the quiet, radiant, unshakable power of a love that would endure beyond time, beyond doubt, beyond the reach of mortality itself.